Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jimmy Jones, and in today's presentation called The Treasure Map to God, together we'll explore the fundamental mental framework to discover God. You may find me at my website, celestialvision.info, or on my YouTube channel, Aquarius Rising. So, the seemingly insurmountable question that humanity faces is, which God, if any, is real? If we are honest with ourselves, the first fact we encounter is that no one has absolute proof that God is real. Now, while there are many people who believe in God and or have faith in God, the absolute proof of God remains elusive to humanity as a whole. And unfortunately, this lack of knowledge sets the conditions for a breeding ground within the mind of man to convince itself of doing wicked things, leaning on its own selfish convictions that there is no God. What is meant by this? Well, from the scientific point of view, we see the predominant belief, and it is just a belief, that science disproves God. However, a more careful consideration reveals that it is not science that disproves God, but a more accurate observation is that it is people that use science in order to prove or disprove God, and that most scientists unfortunately lean toward the left within the category of disbelief. Then, from the religious point of view, we see the same problem, in that each culture attempts to prove God using their own scriptures and understandings of God, but which falls short and to the detriment of the rest of humanity. In other words, the mindset of my God is right and your God is wrong. Simply look over the course of human history to see the absolute atrocities and horrors inflicted upon mankind in the name of God. And finally, we have the atheistic point of view, which are people who believe in nothing and will even argue about their very existence, i.e., do we even exist? Now, all of these points of views lead to the root problem statement that in order to heal mankind, humanity must find immutable proof of God. Now, consider the root contemplation that inside each of us, actually searching Jews, Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Sumerians, Egyptians, on and on and on, we feel a deep desire to know, and I mean truly know, God, to know that we are not abandoned, that we are not some sort of cosmic fluke. Given this thought, humanity must be missing something. And whatever that something is, it must have been lost in time, something our ancestors had that we have lost. Whether it be a piece of technology from the past that we may discover, or a book or carving with the knowledge of God, or we simply discover the knowledge on our own for ourselves. Whatever that something is, it promises to heal the world as it will certainly heal the heart of mankind. And all the world scriptures speak of this. When you look in Judaism, you have New Jerusalem, Paradise, and Mount Zion. Hinduism has the Satya Yuga, or the Age of Truth. In the Zoroastrian religion, we see the Grand Renovation. In Christians, we have the New Earth Inheritance after the Revelation. In Greek, they called it Arcadia, which was a paradise within the Golden Age. And even in the Renaissance period, we had Utopia, and there's so many more. So knowing the ultimate challenge that faces humanity, today I will use a modified quad chart format to present you with a solution. And the method will be to explore the fundamentals of God from varying synchronistic points of view. So with that said, let us begin. So using a modified quad chart, I have anchored my thought in the primary conceptual point of view of unity. And within the thought space of unity, we will explore the syncretic relationships of various points of view, traversing our chart from the top left to the top right, and then from the bottom left to right. So our first syncretic point of view is the alphabet, where we can easily see that the letter A, which is the first letter of the alphabet, is synchronous with the concept of unity. And complementing this is the number 1 from the numeric point of view. Easy enough, correct? Now how about from the linear point of view? Well, this would be a simple line. Now here it gets a little trickier. So how about from the geometric point of view? Well, the line would suffice again as the one thing, but technically it has no two-dimensional geometry. So there is another geometric point of view that can be manifested. and that is the unit circle. Now, for this geometric shape represents a wholeness, a unit of oneness, or something that contains everything. So here you can look at it either way, and science proves this within the mathematical concept of continuity, which the mathematical genius Euler figured out that an ever-expanding circle is also and simultaneously an ever-expanding line on its side. And in regard to the red circle, it is worthy to note a story of Giotto di Bondone, who was an Italian painter and architect from Florence during the late Middle Ages, circa 13th century. When Pope Benedict XI sent a messenger to Giotto asking him to send a drawing to demonstrate his skill, Giotto only drew a red circle, but he drew it so perfect that it seemed as though it was drawn using a pair of compasses, and instructed the messenger to send it to the Pope. The messenger departed ill-pleased, believing that he had been made a fool of by Giotto. The messenger brought other artists' drawing back to the Pope in addition to Giotto's, and when the messenger related how he had made the circle without moving his arm and without the aid of compasses, the Pope and his courtiers were amazed at how Giotto's skill greatly surpassed all of his contemporaries who had drew elaborate drawings. Now, in the bottom left of our chart, we can see just a few of the syncretic cultural relationships within the concept of unity. For example, this is the basis for Unitarianism, which says there is only one God. Some others, whether in concept or specific name, are Heraclitus's Logos or Pythagoras' Monad, which represented all things and to which Plato was an adherent. And the Neoplatonists called this Arch, or the personified version called Aeon. And the Gnostics called it the Pleroma, which means fullness. And in Judaism, it is personified as Ein Sof, or the Most High, and many other names. And in Christianity, it is simply called God. And Hinduism has many names also, such as Brahman or Paramatman, and so on and so forth. And the Hermetics, as well as modern spiritualists, use many different names as well, such as the Creator, the One, the Source, and or the All. The point being that even though different cultures name it different things, whether personified or left in the conceptual realm, they're all talking about the same thing, which leads us to our logic in the lower left right portion of our modified quad chart. Now, using Aristotelian logic, or syllogistic logic, or term logic, our first thought, which is the question that primes the pump, by default, must be that, well, if God is, then we fill in the blank. So, from the logical point of view, the only logical conclusion is that if God is, then it must be everything, which in turn gives us the equation that God equals everything. Now, we do not have to stop there, for if we follow the logic, we can ask the next question. Well, what is everything? And the one thing we absolutely and empirically know is that everything is energy. And we can continue our logical investigation and ask the next logical question. Well, what is energy? And we find that energy equals light, both invisible and visible. Thus, we have brought God out of the conceptual realm and into our physical realm, and can conclude that God is light, which is the one thing that is absolutely everything. Or we can equally say, using logic, that God is energy, or simply that God is everything. Now, there are other things that live in this realm of logic. An example, such as the principle of plenitude, which asserts that the universe contains all possible forms of existence. And a study of the history of this idea reveals very interesting things, such as it seems to have originated with Plato, and it most likely is the reason why Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake, and even Spinoza seen it as necessary in the strictest logical sense. Now, I'm running out of room, so forgive me for overlaying even more information onto these slides, but let us see what some of history's greatest minds think of all of this. Heraclitus said, "Listen not to me, but to the Logos. It is wise to agree that all things are one." And the great philosophers Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, who are all from Miletus, the birthplace of philosophy, are all known to subscribe to the idea that some original matter must turn into all things. And the early apostolic father Irenaeus, in his investigation of heresies and in regard to the pleroma, noted that some confess that the Father of all contains all things, and that there is nothing whatever outside of the pleroma, for it is an absolute necessity that, if there be anything outside of it, it should be bounded or circumscribed by something greater than itself. And probably the most succinct understanding of monism is found within the Kabbalion, which says that the all must be all that really is. There can be nothing existing outside of the all, else the all would not be the all. Now we will move forward in thought and from the primary conceptual point of view of unity into the thought space of duality. So what do we find that lives in the world of two-ness? Well, from the point of view of the alphabet, we have the letter B, which is the second letter, and which appears physically as a bifurcation. Now from the numerical point of view, this is the number 2. And with careful observation, we can see that our modern numeral 2 comes from linearity, where 2 is composed of a linear shape composed of 2 angles. Now from the linear point of view, the easiest way to construct the concept of duality is with a bipolarized line, which holds the inherent concept that if a line is forever extending to the right, then it is also forever extending to the left. Or that if the right is positive, then the left is negative. And the list of dualities are endless. Now, of particular interest is that within the concept of two-ness, where there are multiple ways to construct linearity. For example, we can construct the positive line moving upward, and its opposite would obviously be its perpendicular opposite, which gives us the shape of the letter L, or the ancient God L. We can also achieve the same conceptual understanding with the shape of the letter T, which holds truer to the ancient concept of having 2 angles. Now, in the world of geometry, or the geometric point of view, we arrive at the shape of the Vesica Pisces, which is created by the intersection of 2 circles. And we see that this shape has 2 points. Now, within the geometric space of two-ness are many sacred conceptions in regard to the Vesica Pisces, just some of which are the 2 fish of Pisces, Jesus as the ichthys fish, the miracle of 153 fish, and even circling the square. Now, in the bottom left of our chart, we can see just a few of the syncretic cultural relationships within the concept of duality. For example, this is the basis for the dualistic nature found within man and his religions. Here we find the Egyptian duat, the Pythagorean dyad, the Platonic demiurgos, which later becomes the Gnostic demiurge. And in Christianity, we have the dividing devil. And to the far east, we see the Tao Te Ching, or the Two of Changes, as well as the concept of yin and yang, which is intimately linked with Gemini, the sign of the twins, so on and so forth. So let's move to the bottom right of your chart, where we find that there are many things that live in the logical thought space of two-ness. These are only a few. First, we find that the Hermetic principles live here. In particular, the principles of correspondence, or as above, so below, the principle of polarity, which says that everything is dual and has 2 poles, the principle of rhythm, which says everything has an ebb and a flow, the principle of cause and effect, which says that for every cause there's an effect, and the principle of gender, which says that everything has its masculine and feminine qualities. This space also holds the ancient identity of opposites, which posited that every element had an opposite, such as water is cold and fire is hot. And also in this space is the law of contradiction, which is one of the 3 ancient laws of thought, and which states that contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. And the dichotomy expresses itself in math, philosophy, and linguistics. And a final example of a thing that lives in the space of two-ness is Newton's third law of motion, which states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, in the realm of geometric logic, it is very interesting to note that we find the boundaries of this space of duality. So what is meant by this? Well, using the logic of geometry, the ancient Greeks discovered 3 mathematical problems that were impossible to solve using a square and a compass. These problems are circling the square, trisecting the angle, and doubling the cube. Now, in modern times, humanity has solved the two latter problems of trisecting the angle and doubling the cube, and these were solved within the world of origami. Thank you to the Japanese. So, what is meant when when I say the boundary of two-ness? Well, origami lives somewhere between the second dimension and third dimension. As an example, take a piece of paper and crumble it into a ball, and this would represent a visual of an interdimension, which is probably most accurately to call the second and a half dimension. So here we have found a boundary of what is possible in the true second dimension and what solutions lay just beyond in another dimension. And for your reference, some historical observations of duality are one cannot step twice into the same river, and also what goes up must come down. And here are some geometric concepts for you to contemplate. Now, the mind of man is currently stuck in the mode of duality, and on this slide we will explore the Trinity in an attempt to move your mind past dualism and into another dimension. So what lives in the world of threeness? Well, from the alphabetic point of view, we have the letter C, which is the third letter of the alphabet, and which tends to a circle. And from the numeric point of view, we have the rational number 3, but also the irrational and transcendental number called pi, 3.14 ad infinitum. Here you should note the language used in math is an abridgment to the philosophical and spiritual language of being irrational and transcendental. Now, from the linear point of view, how can we depict triplicity? Is it even possible to depict triplicity from the linear point of view? Well, we find that yes, it is possible, in the understanding that if our line is forever extending to the right and left, then there must be a point of perpetual stillness that lies somewhere in the middle of the line, somewhere where both the positive and negative are radiating from. This perpetual point of neutrality is the source of all and perfectly corresponds with the irrationality and transcendental nature of pi, because it is pi. And this can be better seen from the geometric point of view, where our first true geometric shape of the pyramid is formed. And this not only applies to an equilateral triangle, but all triangles, as all triangles have internal angles of exactly 180 degrees. And even more interesting is that this concept transfers over to the circle as well, as the circle is defined by pi, which lies at 180 degrees along the circle. And further explorations into these synchronistic geometric shapes show that within the second dimension, they are truly inversions of one another, as we find that a triangle holds the least amount of area, while the circle holds the most amount of area. And it should also not go unnoticed that the triangle is the first Platonic solid that fits within a circle. If you can understand these concepts, then it should blow your mind that this is the fundamental Trinity within every religion. It is the basis for Trinitarianism, or God being three things, which was the fundamental debate at the Council of Nicaea, which tried to answer the question, is God one thing or three things? The true answer being that God is both one thing and three things, depending on your point of view. And knowing this information, it should appall you that so much destruction and death has been waged on humanity due to the simple lack of understanding by those who call themselves leaders or learned or holy men or the elite, because truthfully, they are nothing of the sort. So in the bottom right, and within our logic frame, what do we find that lives within the world of 3 and or 3.14? Well, firstly, we can note that light itself exhibits this tripolarity. And if we convert this energy into the geometric waveform, we find that the sine wave has 3 perfect waveforms, those being the circle wave, the square wave, and the triangle wave, which when combined is the geometry of the philosopher's stone, which is said to give its possessor immortality, and it does. And also in the realm of philosophy, we have the doctrine of flux, which basically says that everything physically changes. And in mathematics, We have the balanced equation with the equal sign acting as the fulcrum or the balancing point. And whoever wrote the Testament of Solomon around the first century CE knew the secret. For if one looks fixedly, the pillar is a little oblique, being supported by the infinite spirits, as it is so today. Now, going beyond tripolarity, we will explore the world of the quaternary, or the fourfold world. Following our natural pattern, we find in the alphabet the letter D, and in number, the number 4, which synchronistically has 4 internal angles. Now, it may seem impossible to add another dimension to the tripolarized line, but it can be done. And this is by adding the fourth dimensional field that tripolarity radiates from. And here we hit the limit of dimensional depictions within the one-dimensional linear point of view. Now shifting to the geometric point of view, which lives in the second dimension, we find that we are able to depict our concept of fourness primarily as the square, but also as a circle, where both have 360 degrees. And we should take careful note that the circle in this configuration of fourness is the ancient symbol of the earth found all over the world. Now in the bottom left quadrant of your slide, just some of the synchronistic relationships are displayed for you. I suppose that at this time, if you understand Unitarianism and Trinitarianism, I'll introduce into the mind of man a new concept of quaternarianism, which is a fancy word of saying God has 4 things. And we could see that the ancients would have understood me, for in their own versions, the Egyptians had the concept of the Jib, which is your heart, and the personified Jeb or Gib, Lord of Earth. And in Judaism, Geb is the Archangel Gabriel, but also the Garden of Eden, and Dan in the lion's den, and also the field that Abraham purchased in order to bury his family. In Christianity, it is the 4 ordinal Gospels and the message of love which emanates from your pure heart, and the 40 days in the wilderness of the temptation of Christ, which is the same as the 40 days aboard the Ark of Noah, and many more. In Norse mythology, it is the Dwarf brothers and their forge. And in Sumerian mythology, it is the personified Enki, the Earth Lord, and the conceptual tablet of destiny, which is your balanced heart, which the Hermetics knew as the emerald tablets of Thoth. In the Far East, it is the 4 dragons, or the 4 winds, or the 4 turtle legs that support the pillars of heaven, and the Jade Emperor, your heart, to whom the 3 pure ones, your mind, answers to. In Hinduism, the world turtle is Karma, and Karma is from the heart, which is the personified 4 Kumaras, who answer to Vishnu, your pineal. And in Zoroastrianism, we have the 16 perfect lands, 16 being 4 times 4, or 4 squared. Now within logic, we find that logic itself falls within the fourfold nature of light, as Aristotelian logic, also called term logic or syllogistic logic or simply logic, relies on the form called the traditional square of opposition. And finally, we arrive at our final unsolved math problem, for it is in this 4th dimension that we can solve squaring the circle with a hypersphere and its complement, the hypercube. Please note that the only way to see the 4th dimension is within the mind's eye, which is the 3rd eye, as this dimension lives beyond the physical realm and in the metaphysical realm, although it can now be conveyed with computer animations in the technological age. Welcome to Aquarius. Now let us observe the words of Krishna, who stated, I am the Self, O Gudakesha, seated in the hearts of all creatures. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. And probably the most clear verse of the fourfold nature of man comes from Zoroaster, who said, quote, one need not scale the heights of the heavens, nor travel along the highways of the world to find Ahura Mazda. With purity of mind and holiness of heart, one can find him in one's own heart. Thank you, Zoroaster. Now, once you achieve the 4th dimensional state of consciousness, or alternately the 5th dimensional state of consciousness, if you count time as the 4th dimension, although time is truly the 0th dimension, as time has no dimensionality. Once you achieve this state of consciousness, you'll be able to see what all the ancients were encoding in their sacred scriptures, their temples, and monolithic structures. Every one of them, from the most prominent to the most obscure, were telling you of the time when man would attain this higher state of consciousness. Every one of them were telling you that when man attained this level of consciousness, that it comes with the immutable scientific knowledge of God, and that it is this knowledge, true knowledge, that cures the ignorance of man and heals the heart of mankind, which in turn heals the world and begins the new golden age. Let us test this concept and travel around the world to see the results of a mind that has attained the fourth dimensional state of consciousness. Within the fourfold world of Judaism, we can see that the physical ritual of circumcision is representative of the spiritual circumscription of the square. And where in math you use the square and compass, it is in the spirit that you use the heart and mind, and in the flesh that you use the foreskin and pineal glands. Thus, the mundane circumcision is the physical circumcision, which is symbolic of the spiritual circumcision. And the holy verses of both the Old Testament and the New Testament testify to this, for which we will read a few. Quote, circumcise the foreskin of your heart, Deuteronomy 10:16. Or, cut away, therefore, the thickening about your hearts. That's Jeremiah 4:4. Or my personal favorite, quote, rather, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly. A real circumcision is a matter of the heart. It is spiritual and not literal. Such a person receives praise, not from others, but from God. Romans 2:29. And here's the personification of old Abraham, squaring his own circle as a covenant with God. And now we can understand why there is a giant square slab of green glass in the ancient Jewish cemetery of Beth Sherem in Galilee, for it represents a balanced heart, and by any other name this would be the Emerald Tablets of Thoth or the Sumerian Tablet of Destiny. And this solves the mystery of the sacred green stone of Hattusa, which was the ancient capital of the Hittite Empire. The locals call it the Wish Stone, and scholars believe that the stone may have been a gift from Pharaoh Ramses II to the Hittites after the Battle of Kadesh, and which marks the world's first peace treaty. And this does make sense, as green is the color of peace. And traveling to South America and Bolivia, we find the mysteries of Pumapunku can finally be solved. Remembering our fourfold nature of God, or quaternarianism, we can clearly see that this is the primary metaphysical motif of the people who built Pumapunku, which means Puma door. Now, of particular interest is that the doors scattered around the area were originally aligned in a way to create a mirror effect, which, when viewed, had the impression of looking into infinity. And we know that mirrors in Mesoamerica were used as divinatory aids that could reveal a person's destiny. And mirrors were also viewed as metaphors for sacred caves and also associated with the sun. And even that the earth was conceived as a huge circular mirror. And here we can note Pumapunku is where the Inca believed that the world was created. And the Inca referred to their empire as Tawantinsuyu, which means the four regions. And isn't it interesting that the origin story of the Inca tells us of three caves where four brothers and four sisters stepped out of the middle cave or principal niche? Ladies and gentlemen, all of this is telling you about squaring the circle and is evidence that the Inca had attained the fifth dimensional state of consciousness. In other words, they were God men who delivered the message of the immutable proof of God to their people. Now, traveling to India, we can see the exact same motif in the ancient Buddhist monastery at Ratnagiri, India. And the first thing one should notice is the giant green doorway with four figures carved on the left and four carved on the right. And when we compare the site of Pumapunku, Bolivia to Ratnagiri, India, we find the following undeniable synchronistic evidence. Notice the god Viracocha and Buddha in the centers of their respective doorways. Notice the variously sized niches around the doorways. Notice the similar sized obelisks standing in the courtyards. And it should definitely not go unnoticed that there is a swastika at Pumapunku, which is the primary symbolism in the Buddhist faith. And moreover is the fact that both sites were built at around the same time, around the 6th century CE, and that the god of Pumapunku is named Viracocha, and that there is an Indian god named Virachana, who is first attested in the Atharvaveda, which is the fourth Veda. And final evidence is that recent scientific investigation of the Pumapunku stones has concluded that the stones are in fact geopolymers or man-made stones. And the only ancient humans we know of that had the knowledge of this were the Hindus, who have entire ancient manuals with recipes on creating ancient cements such as Ayurvedic paste. And this knowledge of fourfoldness also solves the mysterious Gate of the Gods located in Peru. Notice that the doorway is similar to that of Pumapunku. Notice that the door is 7 meters by 7 meters, which is 49 meters squared, and that the human pineal gland forms exactly on the 49th day of gestation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very clever encoding of squaring the circle, which truly makes it the Gate of the Gods. And how about the tomb of King Midas, located in ancient Phrygia, now Turkey? It is 16 meters wide, which is 4 squared. It sits 70 meters above the surrounding plain and is flanked by 4 fortresses, not to mention that it bears similarities to the motifs found at Pumapunku. And now you can understand why ancient man went through so much effort to carve these massive doors in the barren deserts of Saudi Arabia. Or why the ancient Egyptians had the motif of the false door. Notice the door on the right clearly has Thoth, which is the 3, seated inside of the door, which is the 4. And finally, we can begin to understand why there would be a massive crop circle in the shape of a door within a circle. And we will depart this presentation with the words of Sri Ramakrishna, who had attained Christhood, who had attained Brahmahood, and became the Brahman. Quote, knowledge leads to unity, but ignorance to diversity. So long as God seems to be outside and far away, there is ignorance. But when God is realized within, that is true knowledge. And perhaps the wisest words ever spoken by Albert Einstein was to his daughter in a letter which he poured his heart out and penned these words, quote, there is an extremely powerful force that so far science has not found a formal explanation to. It is a force that includes and governs all others and is even behind any phenomenon operating in the universe and has not yet been identified by us. This universal force is love. When scientists looked for a unified theory of the universe, they forgot the most powerful unseen force. Love is light that enlightens those who give and receive it. Love is gravity because it makes some people feel attracted to others. Love is power because it multiplies the best we have and allows humanity not to be extinguished in their blind selfishness. Love unfolds and reveals. For love we live and die. Love is God, and God is love. This force explains everything and gives meaning to life. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just given you the treasure map to God, as evidenced by physical science and by all the ancient cultures of the world. And when you know the true spiritual or metaphysical reason as to the why, it makes the physical reason as to the how pale in comparison. What do I mean by this? Well, it becomes irrelevant how they built the structure when you know why they built the structure, because the physical question of how is secondary knowledge to the spiritual question of why. Thank you for your time. Again, you can find me at celestialvision.info and my YouTube channel, Aquarius Rising.